How are you? Welcome to Telesur's Critical Move. A pandemic as big as the one affecting the United States, the world's epicenter of COVID 19, is hurting the North American country. Unemployment. What are the actual figures? How are the Americans tackling this problem? What do U.S. authorities say about it? Let's deploy the board, and we're making the first move. First, let's listen to the suffering workers who have been laid off in the midst of the crisis facing the United States due to the coronavirus pandemic. This is, I'm looking for a job. I get up every morning and I check LinkedIn. I check my unemployment status to see if I classify as unemployed. I help my wife to teach some kids at home. I also have posted several ads to do extra work like gardening and things like that. I'm concerned that unemployment extends until April or May, even until June, July, or August. I lost my job 2 days ago, and my layoff letter, they say, was due to the COVID pandemic. Many of the restaurants which I worked at started to close, as well as the grocery stores also started to close. And this is what the regional representatives of the U.S. government have to say about this ordeal. Next week, we will launch the Federal Unemployment Assistance Program against the pandemic, which will increase weekly payments to those who have requested unemployment benefits. It's an additional $600 a week, which will come very handy for those paying rent or buying food. This program will allow us to provide assistance to people who don't qualify for unemployment insurance. For example, concert workers, temporary workers, and independent workers. We are discussing how to get out of this in the long term. This is both a public health crisis and an economic challenge. And obviously, we need to make it because hundreds of thousands of Washington state residents are applying for unemployment insurance. They are worried about paying the rent. They are wondering if their businesses will survive. It's a tough time for our Washington state citizens. We know we have thousands of people who have dedicated their lives to small business. We want to help them during this time. That is why we are opening the application process for a $5 million emergency grant. This program is intended for eligible small businesses that have been impacted by the COVID-19 who have been requested to stay home. We have identified more than 2,000 state workers who will help the Department of Economic Opportunity process unemployment compensation claims. We are in the process of setting a virtual desktop that would allow state employees to work remotely. Let us review the websites that are also reflecting on this issue. Like Izquierda del Diario, for example, on the last 12th of April, said, "Magic is over at Disney World. 43,000 workers suspended." The theme parks, the entertainment district, and the Disney World hotels closed in mid-March. The payment of wages is expected to end on April 19th, said Disney executive, due to the closure of the theme parks complex, whose reopening is uncertain. On Friday, trade unions representing the security guards and workers involved in facilities and operations reached agreements on the similar terms, as it happened with the union that represents musicians performing at Disney theme parks, who also reached agreements of these characteristics. Disney announced that it would suspend executive, salaried, and non-union employees whose tasks are not essential at this time. Meanwhile, other companies such as Universal Orlando and SeaWorld Orlando, the parks throughout the country, also closed their doors last month due to the coronavirus. SeaWorld reported a layoff of 90% of its staff. Suspensions and dismissals add to the millions of unemployed people whose numbers are growing day by day in the United States, in the middle of an unprecedented health and economic crisis, whose effects are beginning to be felt by Amazon, Walmart, and health workers, among others. Speaking of health workers, Excelsior, on 19th April, said United States hospitals start dismissals. 19th March, is to say. Last week, Born Secures Mercy Health, a firm that manages 51 hospitals in 7 states, announced the suspension of 700 workers. Ballot Health, which operates 21 hospitals, has the same plan for 13,000 employees and foresees salary cuts for its executives. Employees at the National Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C. were notified a few days ago that they should be absent from the week, whether they justified on vacation or asked for the leave without payment. For hospitals that were already in dire financial status before the outbreak, the loss of income raises doubts about their capacity to attend to COVID-19 patients. John Starcher, director of Bond Secures, calculates that the resource hemorrhage for them to amount to $100 million per month. I'm going to take advantage to recommend you the reading of an article called Fanatics, Criticism of the Clothing Reasoning, written by Mexican philosopher Fernando Buenabat and posted on our website, telesur.net, last April 12th. Selecting some of his paragraphs, it says, while fanaticism becomes natural, reason, critical thinking, and science are cornered fanatically. But fanaticism is a very serious threat against humanity. It attacks the most sensitive fibers of social intelligence and destroys it from within historical foundations. All forms of bigotry are being coagulated in the imperialist phase of capitalism. They have been multiplied and expanded under the mantle of impudence and impunity imposed by the economic power and ideology of the dominant class. A few experts have mentioned that one can believe or say, or both things, whatever they wish, that one is free to reproduce beliefs or occurrences as they were scientific or universal truths. The mere fact of believing is more than enough to impose on them or to other people, and that a bossy, authoritarian, or brash tone is sufficient and enough to render irrefutable any antiquated syllogism, such fanaticism. That is the basis of Donald Trump and Bolsonaro's styles and many other puppets born out of the market economy dogmatism. They are supremacists, racist, and Nazi fascists with epistemic bases that are supported by acid, saliva, and strikes in stupidity wordplay and military or police repression against those who are considered to be inferior and disposable. That is to say, 80% of human species, the proletariat. They only listen to what is suitable for them to exacerbate the delusion of their rational arguments or to twist the reasons of others and turn them into fuel for their verbose fires. It is, for example, neoliberalism in full. It does not understand reasons, nor does it admit interrogations or reality. Bigotry is a mutant and conservative black cloud disguised in radical political thought. The bigots do not lack a certain egotistic consciousness for political organization. The antidote is revolutionary scientific reasoning with a critical spirit at war against dogmatism, supremacism, triumphalism, mercantilism, individualism, and the brutality of Nazi fascism. It is capitalism, which is, let us not lose sight of that, a system of bigots. Just citing Hiroshima and Donald Trump would be enough to demonstrate it. We're living in times of intensification of passion and bigotry, which want to eradicate every critical sense against the revolution of human beings. That has been wreaked evident and even irreversible havoc. That is why the battle of ideas is crucial, indeed, against the ideology of the dominant class. We will insist. And we're going to the United States to get some information from our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Jorge Estoso. Tell us more about this, Jorge. Thank you so much. The Americans started to receive $1,200 for unemployment claims from $2,200 million, that the billions in English, in order to compensate the lack of employment generated by coronavirus crisis. Throughout the week, 60 million Americans would receive these $1,200 more, and $500 per children, and many of them will have to wait longer because this first batch is for people in intended for the IRS uh, is the ones who are in their bank accounts and just in order to transfer the money directly to their bank accounts of these beneficiaries. Those who are not in part of this number will have to wait until late or the month or even further. And meanwhile, the Congress continues to debate a new assistance package to alleviate the situation, which is critical. We are looking at in the next few weeks, 70 million Americans will have requested for unemployment benefits, which is 1 in 10 Americans is unemployed, or at least they are partially employed until economic activity is resumed and they can get back to their jobs. Regarding this is the hot issue today. Unemployment is the hot issue today in the White House, and they was talking about reopening the economy. President Trump wants to reopen the economy on first of May, or at least part of his team. They understand. They are following very closely how the economy is reacting and how it's affecting different parts of the world of the country in order to take the decision. What could happen is that a partial reopening of the economy could, in certain places, in certain counties, could start, and then we'll see what happens. Because the question is, those who are not willing to start the economic reopening could become in a horizon even worse before the start of coronavirus, because the figures exceed 520 confirmed. Correct myself. 520,000 confirmed cases of COVID, which are the highest figures worldwide. Back to you in the studio. Thank you so much, Jorge. We're going to see now. Let's do, rather than see, a map of the evolution of this other pandemic affecting the United States today. Unemployment. The United States has been one of the United States have been one of the countries most severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, a fact that can be found in the unprecedented increase in unemployment rate. According to the Department of Labor, during the week of March 23rd to 29th, more than 6.6 million people requested assistance from the state after losing their jobs. Add to this 3.2 million citizens who became unemployed the week before on March 16 to 22nd. These numbers exceed the figures during the 2008 financial crisis, when 9 million Americans lost their jobs. According to experts, at least a fifth of the United States economy is paralyzed one way or the other. This is in part due to the fact that, unlike countries like Venezuela, the Trump administration has not implemented payment programs for small and medium-sized enterprises to keep workers on the payroll, and therefore many businesses have been forced to close and also lay off the employees. Most affected workers belong to hospitality and food service sectors. However, this situation, although it certainly increases due to the pandemic, dates back to several years before. In October 2019, Donald Trump celebrated that the country had posted an unemployment rate of 3.5%, the lowest over the last 50 years. But according to the Labor Department itself, over the same period, 218,000 unemployment benefit applications were filed. The mining sector did not add workers after 3 consecutive months of layoffs, and the automotive sector laid off employees for the 4th consecutive month. In addition, the manufacturing sector fell for the second year in that year, which sparked a recession due to the White House trade war against China. Of course, Donald Trump forgot to mention during his celebration the strike launched by General Motors workers after losing their jobs. There are considerable gaps between African American and white workers. The former face unemployment rates of 2.3 percentage points higher than the latter. Also, In August 2017, a report from the U.S. Department of Labor revealed that the unemployment rate dropped to 156,156,000 jobs, and the unemployment figures had reached 1.4%. All these figures contradict the promises made by the New York tycoon, I should say, during his 2016 election campaign, when he assured that he would create 25 million new jobs. We're going to a small brief break, but remember you can become an analyst in our critical move through our strategic play. Let's look on the string. Almost 17 million unemployed in the United States in only 3 weeks in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. But Donald Trump had promised in his campaign to create 25 million jobs. Another fake news from the tycoon? Give us your opinion. We're going to a break and we'll come back. I saved I had to spend on this month's rent. My roommate is sick. We believe she is sick with the virus, but there are not enough tests, so we don't know. I have no idea what we're going to do about the rent next month, how the situation will evolve, and how we will pay our electricity bill. Since my mother lost her full-time job, our greatest fear is to be evicted and lose our home. I have been dismissed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I was concerned about paying my rent on the 1st of April. We also have just paid off a mortgage on the 1st of May, in addition to paying my debit card. With this new reality, this crisis, the payment of rent should be suspended. They must be saying we are not going to pay, because it is our only means of survival. In under just 21 days, 17 million Americans have been unemployed. Let's review this panorama let's put it on the geopolitical board. The pandemic crisis caused by the new coronavirus, in addition to causing a collapse of the health system on a global level, has brought about an important crisis in the labor market in the United States, the epicenter of the pandemic. The crisis directly affects almost 17 workers who lost their jobs in just 21 days, after another 6.6 million last week requested government unemployment benefits. The wave of dismissals reached almost all the sectors of the economy. According to figures disclosed by the Department of Labor, this is expected to worsen in the next few weeks, with a potential increase in the unemployment rate of up to 15%. Before the pandemic outbreak, the unemployment rate was around 3.5%. The policies implemented by the Donald Trump's government, the U.S. Congress, and the Federal Reserve have focused on reactivating the economy, injecting thousands of millions of dollars into the market at the expense of protecting workers. The relief measures for those who have lost their jobs in the midst of the crisis are almost null. Unlike other countries, the United States have not implemented a payment program for companies to keep employees in their payroll, one of the reasons why the unemployment figures are so high. The multi-billion-dollar package approved to rescue the economy just offers direct payments to households, business assistance, and unemployment benefits. In the United States today, there are over 560,000 cases of COVID-19 and more than 220,000 dead, according to data from the Johns Hopkins University. And having put this in context, let's go to our analysis. Emilio Gapiano, political analyst and expert in security, From Venezuela, Renato Bolivar is accompanying, director of the Venezuelan Center for African American and Caribbean Studies, international analyst, and also expert in Latin America and the Caribbean, South-South relations, and also an Africanist. Welcome, both of you, to our critical move. I'm going to start with Emilio. Greetings to you, Emilio, on behalf of our staff. Uh, we have this phenomenon of an increasing number of unemployed in the United States, but as a consequence of the crisis that's going through, this country is going through because of the coronavirus. But in the pieces, we said it's not a new phenomenon, but it comes just to add to what something that was accumulating in that country. Is it true or false? Thank you for your invitation. Unemployment clearly is the consequence of a fact that to limit the impact of the epidemic, they had to order the closure of many businesses and companies. In the case of restaurants, etc., clearly, if they are not open, people must stay home. And here, there's no system like in other countries whereby the country automatically guarantees a percentage of the workers' wages that have been laid off, so that there's no interruption, let's say, in their income, and so that they know that when they go back to work, there will be no difference. For instance, in Belgium in the Scandinavian countries, normally the government keeps 94%, 84% of the wages for the workers in a situation like this, so they don't lose their wage, and they wait until their jobs are reopened. But here in the United States, this system does not exist. That's why the government is trying to mend the damage by earmarking a certain amount of money. These are loans that can be pardoned or be repaid, I should say, if the employer proves that he had the same employees as before. So they're doing something. They're trying to limit the financial consequences, but clearly this is not automatic as in other countries, and it also depends on the organization of the companies, whether they have the capability to do that, the willingness, if they have the resources, and if they are honest. So it's more complicated than in other countries, where in other democracies where this happens automatically and the wages are guaranteed for the laid-off workers, and they wait until they are back in the job market. Second question, Emilio, before going to ask Reynaldo, is the U.S. prepared, having said this, that we're living through in that country, is the U.S. ready to protect the workers in the case of pandemics like the ones they are suffering today? Are you listening, Emilio? Yeah, I said it was a question for the other guest. No, I'm sorry. No, clearly, the country is not, the U.S. is not prepared, because it is the capitalist system in the country, let's say, and people are working, they get their wages, and if you don't work, you don't get paid, and you have some unemployment benefits. Now the government is setting up billions of dollars for unemployment benefits in order to, but this is not an automatic system. But it requires the congressional approval. It requires that the president agrees with that, and then that must be distributed, and that will take some time, and because we are facing all kinds of situations. For instance, now I know people who receive $1,200 or 2,400 if they are married, and in addition $500 per each child they have. But that was over the last few days. But you have to have a bank account electronically connected to the IRS. So there's a lot of people that the ethnic minorities who or the Spanish-speaking people who do not have these kinds of bank accounts, that they don't have any other way to receive the money electronically. For them, perhaps they're going to take months in order to receive these checks, a paper check. So this clearly is going to create enormous problems for them, whether they are employees or employers. Of course, the United States is not prepared for this. They are trying now to repair the damage, but this is way too complicated, and it's very, you have to have a bank account known to the federal government through the IRS, and that is the way to transfer electronically. And for those who don't have that, they have to wait months. People who are not working. Thank you so much, Emilio. Stay with us for a couple of more minutes. We're going to bring in Reynaldo Bolivar, who's accompanying us from Venezuela. Reynaldo, I'm going to take some of what Emilio said, referring to the ethnic minorities, to the Afro-American, African American, as they are commonly known in the United States, who are not only an important number of those who are heavily affected by the COVID-19 pandemic in that country, which is the epicenter of the coronavirus in the world. But also, because of what Emilio said, these are people whose pockets are also being greatly affected. And in terms of jobs, no further need to say anything. Thank you, Ray. Each of the arguments of this debate, unfortunately, the U.S. employment policy is different from the labor policy of the European Union. The European Union has unemployment insurance, and they do have unemployment insurance, and they are provided assistance by the state. But this doesn't happen in the United States. I could establish all the comparisons with countries like Venezuela, China, Cuba, others. But just to cite other industrialized countries who have a different policy, different from the United States. The African American population, which is one of the first minorities, 18% of the American population is African American. And together with the Latinos is the population with a high percentage of millions of people whose living conditions are precarious. For instance, if you live off an insurance, and these minorities, they do the worst jobs, and their GDP composition is 80%, almost 80%, just barely 18% of the industrial sector, and under 2% in the agricultural sector. So in these sectors that you just mentioned, tourism, hospitality, finance, transport, those are the ones, the majority of the employees are from African American and Latino background. So that's why many of these jobs are being closed in restaurants. For instance, in New York, there are over 24,000 restaurants. Imagine the amount of African American and Latinos who have lost their jobs. Now, if you allow me, I would wish to introduce another variable So you said before the pandemic, what was happening? But there's a variable um, by a a French author who wrote in 1997 a bestseller, over 1 million copies sold. And in this book, she made reference to the fact that capitalism, as such, in industrialized countries, was capitalism was needing less and less labor force for sectors that need to be replaced. So people who were working in shops, in hotels, in some other places were displaced by technologies. So some of the few sectors affected, not affected, was high tech, because each sector is ever more automated, so the labor force is lesser. It's less. So on par with the economic growth, there's also a growth of unemployment. Interesting. It's an interesting take. Let's go. Let's see how, unfortunately, Reynaldo, that is proportional to this kind of phenomenon. They are proportional to the largest minorities, and I don't want to refer to that to minorities because they are becoming a considerable number, like in the United States. But being a minority is proportional to unemployment, lack of access to quality healthcare. That history repeats in the United States. I wanted to add another information and a figure that we have talked, and is the need or not for people, for certain people, certain categories of people, not to mention minorities of ethnic groups, in this case the African American and the Latinos. The Donald Trump's policy and his previous election campaign was based on full access to employment by Americans, basically for white Americans. But there are people who are arriving in the country, who basically the Latino, the migrants, and Trump has not publicly messed with the African Americans as with the Latinos, but he wants to contain Latino migrants. They want to take them out of the equation because statistically, perhaps Emilio have better information, but statistically by 2050 the migrant population, the Latino population in the United States will be will exceed in numbers the Caucasian population. This will be now is 32%. The Latinos make up 32%, and is close to occupying political power positions by a group that has enjoyed that, like the Caucasians, and Trump is just the instrument, the tool to avoid that, because health access of the neediest and the poor. Thank you so much, Reynaldo. I also thanks for your time you have had for Telesource Critical Move. Thank you once again until I see you again. So we're going to a break again. But remember that you can participate through our strategic move. There's a lot of people participating, both in favor and against. So I thank you for your opinions. Strategic move. Almost 70 million unemployed in the United States in only 3 weeks in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. But Donald Trump had promised in his election campaign to create 25 million jobs. Is this another fake news from the tycoon? Give us your opinion. And those who are responding to the question in Twitter, we're going to do a break and we'll come back soon. Stay tuned. According to the International Labour Organization, the novel coronavirus crisis has already affected almost 2.7 million workers, nearly 81% of the world workforce. For those who say on social media wouldn't take this information into account. Let's review the unemployment figures in the Americas. How? Let's see. The Director General of the International Labour Organization, Guy Reed, warned that it's not only a health crisis but also a major economic and labour market crisis that is having a huge impact. The adoption of urgent measures recommended by the ILO include the expansion of social protection policies, support to employees and employers to keep jobs active, and granting financial assistance. For his part, the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, Alicia Bárcena, emphasized that the pandemic will have devastating effects on the world economy, and particularly in the region. To mitigate the impact of this economic crisis, governments such as Cuba, Venezuela, Argentina, and Mexico have adopted measures that focus on protecting their workers, stimulating the local economy, and maintaining both jobs and income. The reduction of the workday, paid vacation plans, and other subsidies have been implemented to balance the situation caused by the social isolation measures that are key to stop the spread of the virus. Meanwhile, governments such as those in Chile, Brazil, Ecuador, Uruguay, and Colombia face the collapse of their healthcare systems with increasingly higher confirmed cases figures. This is due in principle to the fact they minimize the pandemic danger and refuse to declare quarantine periods to avoid stopping the economic activities in their countries. They had to eventually declare the state of emergency and curfews to stop the spread of the virus. This has brought about the emergence of two labor-related phenomena. First, the workers forced by the companies to stay on their jobs without any protection or face being dismissed. The second has to do with the so-called informal workers, who have been forced to continue their activities even at the risk of getting sick, since they receive no social protection from the state. And this situation clearly illustrates that the interests that the neoliberal governments are safeguarding are the corporate ones, to the detriment of workers' protection in the face of a health crisis like the one the world is suffering today. And with this geopolitical look, we'll introduce Dr. Ángel Rafael Toledo Leal, research professor and international analyst, also a diplomat, a career diplomat. Professor, how are you from the distance? Greetings to you from hug from the distance. Professor, on the board, on the geopolitical board, is the situation in the United States that how, in parallel with the COVID-19 pandemic, they're also facing another pandemic that, if we analyze it in the short term, we say, but this is a consequence of the crisis the country is going through because of the pandemic. But if we dig deeper in this iceberg of 80-90% under the sea level, we're going to see that the situation is way more complex. The COVID-19 is the drop that overflowed the cup. It's true. What you're saying has been said by many other people, and even in the logic, people in the logic of capitalism and the private property and the sacrosanct things, that things to be over life, over welfare, and well-being, and even way that before that. So for Donald Trump, what they have to protect is the banks, is the businesses, the market, and that story of American way of life is just gone down the drain. What we saw with the COVID, it was revealed in the eyes of those 50 countries, the group of Lima and other around Europe, who that the model had failed. The neoliberal model had brought death to social reason, and capitalism are not satisfying their lives. No analyst in the world brought this pandemic as an enemy, as a non-revealed enemy. We don't have the antidote, and we have to isolate society, leave people, keep people home. But the success in Venezuela, a relative success, because one death is a lot to us. So unfortunately, but in comparison with the numbers of developed countries, Venezuela's success has to do with the fact of being a socialist government concerned for the people. We have a humanistic president commanding a civilian and a military unity that have been taking us through safe paths. Despite the fact that we are suffering an unjust blockade from the US, we are financially blockaded, we have difficulties in every respect of life. However, in health, where there is some people bet our failure, then we were successful. And that is the abysmal difference, not only with New York, with any American citizen, and compare the indicators of that city with the indicators showing in Cuba or Nicaragua, Mexico, and compare the effectiveness in terms of the financial support by a population that is unprotected, like in the United States. We can't forget that we have 30 million poor and beggars. And those people living in the subway. But 30 million Americans, 30 million Americans born in the United States who live on the streets. And these are the victims of coronavirus. The second victim, the people over the age of 65. So the Donald Trump government, like happened in the European Union, what they did was to condemn some elderly people because they don't care. Sounds tough, but they don't care. Because Christine Lagarde in Europe said that, well, we have to do something about the number of the elderly almost getting undue benefit, undue pensions, because they were retired. So the U.S. is showing the worst face of capitalism. I don't believe that this is because this alleviates the loads of capitalism. Let's not forget that the capitalist tycoons, they have the social democrats as the soft side, as a repair shop for the mistakes of the brutal right, and Donald Trump in this term. For a couple of minutes, we're going to, because I'm about to close the program, but I want to ask you this, just to go beyond the U.S. borders and see the unemployment phenomenon, as you said before, Reinaldo Bolivar. It affects especially the so-called minorities, and among the minorities we have the Latinos, many Central American citizens who decided to pursue the American way of life, and for many years they sent money to support their families back home on the basis of the remittances. What happens with those who are joining the ranks of the unemployed in the United States and their families? Unfortunately, what happened to housing in 2008, they go to the streets and they join the 30 million beggars and poor people. This is very regrettable, because not only because we're affected like Latin Americans, but it affects other countries who rely on remittances, and they live in the U.S. in very precarious conditions. Remember that for Americans, not to work is almost a sin, and a loss day of job means not paying rent, because not all of them are regularized in situation in the U.S. And in the case of Latin Americans, they are in pursuit of jobs that pay by the hour, but it is impossible in the midst of these circumstances to get any recourse. Thank you so much for your reflections, for this analysis, for the viewers of Critical Move. Until next time, Dr. Toledo accompanying us. We're going to conclude. Another breach promised by Donald Trump, a sample of what is the real priority for the White House in times of pandemic: protecting the employers, that is big business, and not the employees, not the human being. Whatever it is, and without the slightest intention to make political firewood from the fallen tree, we will have to see what impact this unemployment historical figure will have on the November 3rd elections. Another lesson taught by the pandemic to Americans: voting for the rulers is also voting for the guarantors of their lives. As long as powerful money in the country of democracy respect the people's will in the elections. For today, we're closing our geopolitical board.